مصلحا ومجددا فارنوا بنظر طاهر وجناني.
Assalamu Alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, dear viewers. Today with us we have our beloved brother Abdul Hakim Shahid from St. Louis, Missouri. And today we are blessed as we will hear his journey to the true Islam, Ahmadiyya. Assalamu Alaikum, dear brother.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Well, you know, my journey is quite different from a lot of other brothers' journeys that I've been watching. First of all, I was born in 1959 here in St. Louis, Missouri. And as a young man, like most African Americans, I grew up in the church, Pentecostal church, actually. I wasn't a believer like my mother and my uncles and aunts and cousins, and most of them. They were pretty much particularly devoted to Christianity. I had some doubts about it early on in my life. It was pretty difficult for me because my mother used to take me to church. And when she would take me, I would notice sometimes they had a big, huge statue of Jesus, this so-called Jesus, alayhi salam. This Jesus they called Jesus. And I would always look at this statue and wonder to myself, if this is really God's son, why is he in so much pain, and why can't he save himself? That was the doubt that I always stuck in my mind, was that I don't understand that. I as a young boy, I was told never to question, the preachers, the pastors, and stuff like that. In my family, they were very strict with it. You don't question the pastor. But I realized that was confusing, and it was causing me more confusion than actually giving me any answers to anything. And so as the years went on, I never actually took it serious. So I didn't really become devoted to it. And another thing that was really confusing was that my mother, sometimes when I heard her praying, she would say, oh God, or oh Jesus. And sometimes she would say the Holy Spirit. And I would say, did she just mention 3 beings? And I was always saying, who is she really praying to? This was the confusing part for me. And so me and my cousins, we would have conversations over it privately. We wouldn't let them know that we were discussing the issues about Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit and so on and so forth. But my journey to Ahmadiyya started when my brother was murdered. My oldest brother was murdered. And in the streets, that's the thing we used to do back in the day. We used to hang out and do drugs. And yeah, I was a thug. I was a thug at the time. The word thug wasn't used, but you could say if I was a thug, I was a thug. My brother was a thug. We were all hustlers and doing what we wanted to do. But my brother ended up getting killed. And that changed for me. And at that point, I was very much confused about religion at that time. I didn't even know if God existed, but I used to say, God, you cannot hold me accountable if you don't show yourself to me. This is what I used to say. And so after we buried my brother, I started this quest of looking for answers. And where I lived here in the city of St. Louis was a library that I used to go to. It was a library that had this big, huge book in it that I used to read out of. It was called Comparative Religion. It was about this thick, pretty thick. And I would go through it and look at it and read it and go through it and look at it. And I started studying some of the major religions around the world: Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, Zoroastrianism, Sikhs, whatever I could read about the nature of God, this being whom we all proclaim that is a being. Christians called him Jesus, the Muslims called him Allah, but I didn't even know who Allah was, really. I didn't quite understand the name Allah. And, different religions were calling him that. So I was thinking, wow, here we are, a race of people who don't even know who God is. And I had an older cousin who was into what he called more science at the time. And he went by the name of Steve Wright Ill. And I didn't know what that meant, but my cousin was really close to my brother. So after my brother got killed, my cousin would come and see me, after he got out of jail. And so he would always come around with this red Turkish fez on. And he would always greet me with the greeting of Islam. And I didn't know what he meant by that. I was I was pretty much confused by what he mean, Islam. So I asked him one day, I said, explain to me, what are you talking about? So he explained to me, he said, listen, he said, there is only one God. Now, when he said that, I looked at him, I said, so you don't believe in Jesus? He said, no, Jesus was a prophet. I said, he was a prophet. He said, yeah. And the way he explained it to me was quite different from how I heard from anybody else. He said to me in a way that was so powerful that it really struck a core in me about the existence of God. He said, first of all, how he would address me, cousin. And back then, I had a nickname that was not Abdul Hakim. My birth name was Tracy Lamont Pruitt. My nickname was Knock, because that was my street name, and I was known for pretty much being a person who could handle things in the streets. If my brother ever got in trouble, he would always come and get me to deal with the situation that he was dealing with certain people. And so my cousin, he said, Knock, as he called me back then, was my nickname. He said, look, cousin, if a man has to go, if a God has to go to the bathroom, and a God has to sleep and eat like you, and a God has to dress himself like you, and a God has feelings like you, then he's not a God. He's a human being. And it literally shook me when he said that, because my mother them had a flip side to the story. Oh, he was the spirit. at one point, but then he's man, at another point. But I pretty much liked his understanding because it made more sense. It's just logical. It's reasonable to understand that God is not a man. So I said to him, look, cousin, give me some more literature to read. Give me something else to read about him. This was in 1979, when my brother was murdered. And I've been in Ahmadiyya 40 years, 41 years almost. So my cousin, he said to me, he said, yeah, I'll bring you some more books. He brought me some more books, and I started reading. So the name I came across, the book that he brought me was a book with see, as a black man in America is very important. We need that. I needed that. That was my growth. That helped me. But I still didn't see the connection with him and the Creator. So I began to wonder, okay, is this man really a prophet? Because he kept saying, well, he's a prophet for our people. And I asked him one day, I said, what about the world? He said, no, that's why he was sent to us. Now, this particular point, he didn't even mention Muhammad. He mentioned Muhammad in passing, but not in presence, not like the Quran is, that Quran they got is that of Muhammad. He said, this is Noble Drew Ali brought this book. Now, I was always a reader. I've always read books in school and wherever I can get my hands on. I was always a reader, and I was always about history, my Black history, as I was studying back then. And I read books on Malcolm X and W.E. Du Bois and most of the Black historians, some of the Black scholars I read about, a lot of them. And but I was perplexed about this man because I didn't know very much about him. And I would read his Quran at the time with the Bible. And I didn't see a connection still. So I kept following my cousin. Now, the most important thing doing this journey for me was that it was in 1979 that the Iranian crisis began with the hostages in America, from America. And I think about that time, I'm sure about that time, that it was in the month of Ramadan. And I was coming from outside and I came in the house, and my grandmother, she said, look, this was the expression she gave. She signaled me. And I said, what? She said, look at these people. And there was the Muslims in the month of Ramadan circling the Kaaba. I looked and I said, wow, they are some praying people. So at that time, I thought I was one of them. And I began to say, I'm going to go and talk to him and say, when do we say prayers like them? To my cousin. Unfortunately, when I went to him, he said, we don't pray like that. He said, that was the past of Muhammad back then. I said, who is this Muhammad? He said, don't worry about him. He said, you need to worry about Noble Drew Ali. He's our prophet. Now, I felt like at that point when he told me that, he was trying to hide something. I didn't say it to him directly, but I felt that he was not telling me the truth. And so I kind of, waited for him to come again. And when he came back again, I said, so you need to explain to me why we don't pray. He said, look, I thought we had this discussion. I said, yeah, but I said, I'm not going to stop until you give me an answer. And he said to me, well, look, Back then, they prayed 5 times a day. And he said, now we don't do that. If we have to pray, we stand and pray. But the strange thing about that was that me and him never prayed at all. And even back then, when I was getting inundated with alcohol and stuff, we were still drinking and, you know, as they say today, getting high, whatever. He would always take the wine bottle and pour out some wine and say, praise astaghfirullah rabbi min kulli dhanbin wa atubu ilayhi. Allah bless this bottle. And I found that, I said, that is strange. And so I began to just try to understand the dynamics of what he was saying. He made a lot of sense at times, but at times he didn't. And at some times in point, he was very angry. He stayed very angry at white people. I was angry too, but not like him. I had a type of sense of composure about myself that I would not like to get in trouble most of the time, but I did get in trouble at times. But the fact is, he stayed in trouble, and he was always going back to jail. So finally, he did end up going back to jail. And when he went back to jail, I didn't know too many other Moors that was in this area, as they called themselves, Moors or Moes. So he had given me a bunch of literature, and at the time too, he had given me a Holy Quran, a real Holy Quran, which was the commentary, the tafsir was by Yusuf Ali. So I didn't even know who Yusuf Ali was at the time either. But he gave me that Quran, and he gave me which was called a Haftorah, the Jewish scripture. He had some books because he was going to jail, and he said, I got something to give you. So he gave me some of those books. And when I opened the Quran, I looked at it, but I was like, what is this? So I didn't really read it. I just closed it. I said, I can't read this. I closed it. And I continued to read some of the pamphlets he gave me. And so this still in 79. And one day I'm walking down a main street here in Missouri, which we called Natural Bridge at the time. And I'm walking, and so I run into 2 Christians, and we started holding a discussion about God, religion, Jesus. And the discussion went in such a way that the 2 people I were talking to, the woman and the man, the lady started screaming and yelling, speaking in tongue, as she say. And I never will forget, it was a very, very hot day. So hot. I was sweating. I had on this red cap. I had my briefcase with literature in it. I was trying to explain to her about Noble Drew Ali. He was the prophet for the black man. And look, sister, you know, you need to go this way instead of that way. But as she continued to speak in tongue, I walked away from her a little bit and turned to the gentleman. I said, look, man, listen, it is so hot out here. I'm going to go in this barbershop. It's called Pyramid. I walked into this barbershop and I said, Islam. And they looked at me, both the brothers, they were Muslims, they had on caps. Brother name, he was an Ahmadi brother by the name of Brother Wali and Brother Khalil. And Khalil, he said to me, you must be a Moorish Science Muslim. I said, how do you know? He said, because I was one. He said, it's not Islam. He said, it's Assalamu Alaikum. I said, what? He said, it's Assalamu Alaikum. He said, young man, that is the greeting. I said, wow. I said, what does that mean? He said, it means what you're trying to say. It means peace be unto you. And I said to him, I never will forget, I said, can you write that down for me? And he wrote it down for me. But when I entered this barbershop, the other brother, Brother Wali, he greeted me, Assalamu Alaikum. And he said, well, you know, the salutation is not Islam, young man. He said, Islam is the name of the religion. And Muhammad is the prophet. And then again, I heard that name, Muhammad. But Muhammad didn't catch my eye at the time. See, really, it was Mirza Ghulam Ahmad alayhi salam who led me to Muhammad. I looked on the wall of the barbershop, and I never will forget, there were posters, calendar posters. And one had the second Khalifa, Bashiruddin Mahmud Ahmed, radiallahu anhu, alayhi salam, may Allah be pleased with him. And the other one had the third Khalifa on the other side, and the promised Messiah, alayhi salam, was in the middle. Now, it was the promised Messiah whom I looked at very carefully because he stood out more at the time to me. And I said to him, who is that man? And they said, that's the Messiah. I said, the Messiah of who? He said, the Messiah of the world. He said, he's the Messiah for the Muslims and the Christians and the Jews. I said to Brother Wali, I said, man, I said, Messiah, are you talking about like Jesus? He said, yes. I said to him, in a joking tone, I said, get out of here. I says, Jesus. And I never will forget, even at that point, I had that doubt. But at the same time, something was telling me, look at him. And I kept looking at him. And what I saw, this beautiful radiance in his face on a poster, I said, man, he looks very, very serious about something. And so I asked the brother at the barbershop, Brother Wali and Khalil, do you have anything on him for me to read? Brother Wali told me at the time, he said, we have some pamphlets. They gave me some literature. I read some literature. I took the literature with me, and then I took it home and read some of it. But before I left, I asked them, I said, where's your temple? And they said to me, we have a mosque up on 44 Oakwood in Pine Lawn. Now, I'm thinking to myself, what do you mean mosque? I said, mosque. I said, temple. He said, so then I said, what do you mean mosque? He said, it's called a mosque. Some say temple. It's the same. It's a place of worship. I said, oh, okay. So he said, if you'd like to come, you can come and join us. Come and see it on Friday. And before I left, one of the brothers said to me the prayer, the Quranic surah we recite, Suratul Ikhlas. And he said, he recited it, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Qul huwa Allahu ahad, Allahu samad, Lam yalid wa lam yulad, wa lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad. I said, what is that? He says, Arabic. I said, can you write that down for me? And he wrote it down. But the way he wrote it, it was not in Arabic. He wrote it in transliteration. I thought it was Arabic. I didn't know it was just transliteration. So he said, if you learn this prayer, and then he explained to me what it meant, you know, say, He is Allah, the one, the independent, the besought of all. There is none like unto him. He does not have a son or a daughter. He says, beget not, nor is he begotten. So I kept reading this. On my way home, I started going up the hill, looking at this paper that he'd written to me, given to me, and I kept reciting it and reciting it. By the time I got home, I had actually memorized it. And so I would read it. What is this beget not? What is to beget not? Because I was not a person who was into religion in the sense that to hold debates or argue with anyone about their faith. I would just like to each his own. That's the way I felt about it. So I get home, I read it, and I kept reading the pamphlets. And then I read the pamphlet, Jesus Didn't Die on the Cross. And I was like, Jesus didn't die on the cross. And what rattled my brain was that we were raised to believe that Jesus did die on the cross, and Jesus suffered for man's sins and bore the burden of the world upon his shoulders. So in that pamphlet had the biblical verses to prove that Isa alayhi salam did not die on the cross. By the promised Messiah alayhi salam, he had posed these arguments, and I was reading them most of the time. I used to carry the little pamphlet with me I must have carried it so much I wore it out, I guess. But I would read it all the time. And I remember coming to two passages that the promised Messiah alayhi salam was talking about in the Bible. One of those passages was where Jesus alayhi salam in Mark 12:29 was addressing the Israelites about Tawheed. He said, O children of Israel, our Lord is one. What is the first of all commandments? And they replied, our Lord is one. The other thing was that he talked about how Jesus didn't die on the cross was that his bones were not broken. And he talked about the time he spent on the cross. And he showed the flaws in the biblical scripture as to the period in time in which Jesus alayhi salam remained on the cross. Now, I found those arguments very compelling and very disturbing, because I was like, wow, I'm going to ask my people about this, because this kind of sounds like, this sounds true. But the whole thing was that I eventually didn't tell him right away, and I went back to deal with my cousin again. So he was locked up in jail. And I had gotten a book from the mosque on Friday. To just tell you how that story went was that I was looking for the masjid on Jummah Day. And I'm standing right in front of the masjid, but did not know it. And at that time here in St. Louis, they had a speaker on the outside. And the person started calling the adhan. I heard the adhan, and I turned around, and there was a house with a door open. And I saw some people going in. I was standing in the middle of the streets. So I started following them. And I said, is this the temple of the Ahmadis? At the time I said Ahmadis, something I must have said. And they said, yeah, yeah. And they said, come on in. And I never will forget the first two brothers that I saw in the masjid was Brother Ali and Brother Faisal. They were sitting in the front in chairs because they were elderly people. I didn't know them, but they greeted me, Assalamu Alaikum, brother. And I said, I tried to say it. I said, wow, what is it? Alaikum salam or something like that. He said, you'll learn. So I came and sat down. But before I sat down, one brother said, you got to take your shoes off. So I took my shoes off. I said, oh, I'm sorry. He said, no, you're okay. Just take your shoes off. I never will forget entering the house of Allah that day. It changed my whole life. I never met such loving brothers in my life. These brothers became the father that I never had. The big brother that had just gotten killed. These brothers literally saved my life. So one of the brothers I met by the name of Brother Rashid Ahmed from Illinois, not to get him confused with Rashid, who was a missionary, because I met him later, but I met Brother Rashid Ahmed. His name was Rashid Ahmed too. He was a very good brother, and we used to sit a lot, and I gave him my phone number and he would call me. And so he would talk to me a lot about Islam and Ahmadiyya. And so to get to the point again about my cousin, I had gotten this book called The Philosophy of the Teachings of Islam. And I would read that book so much. And the most important thing that struck me in that book was that I was curious about Nafsi Amara, Nafsi Lawama, and Nafsi Mutma'ina. And where the promised Messiah salam talked about the natural state of man, the first question popped in my head was, what state am I in? And I thought, when I read the English portion of it, because I couldn't read Arabic, I said, I must be in this state. And at that time, I started crying because I realized I was not morally, how can I say? I was not morally molded or shaped right. My mother them had somewhat good ethics, but they didn't have what Islam gave me. So I continued to read this book by the promised Messiah, and I one day my cousin asked to see me, come and see him at jail, come and see him at the correctional center, and I went to see him, but I brought the book with me. And the book, I had, at that time, it was a little green and white book. It had the picture of the promised Messiah in it. I took the book and opened it up and showed it to him. I said, this man is saying he is the Mahdi. And he looked at me and his face changed and he said, let me tell you something. He said, that man, European. That man is not a black man. That man is not the one who can save you. I'm telling you, only Noble Drew Ali and Allah can save you. And I said to him, but this man is speaking about Allah too. And so he said, you need not to follow them. He said, I'm telling you, that was the old Islam. So I was a little bit disturbed again at the fact that I thought I could share this information with him, and he would really say, hey, let's read together, because I thought he was like that. Because he was a very intelligent brother. But it wasn't like that. So we would get into heated arguments, because at this time, now I'm going to Ahmadiyya. I'm coming to the mosque on Fridays. And not only coming to the mosque, I'm attending some of the meetings, because the Moorish temple, they didn't have one around at the time. So I was never able to actually go to it. And so I continued to go to Ahmadiyya Mosque, and I met a lot of brothers in them. And one day there was another brother by the name of Brother Ahmed Saeed. May Allah rest his soul. He said, how would you like to learn how to read the Holy Quran? And I said, well, the brothers already, one brother was teaching me prayers, because I asked about the prayers. And he said, that's good. And Brother Rashid was teaching me the prayers. And Brother Saeed was wanting to teach me the Holy Quran. And I said to Brother Saeed, I said, man, look, I can't read that. You know, that's what I told him at the time. I said, I can't read that. And he said to me, young man, give yourself more credit than what you have. He said, you're intelligent. You made it this far. Allah has brought you here for a reason. And I said, so when are you going to have classes? And he said, I have classes every Sunday. Here in the basement of the masjid at the time was that little bitty house, 44 Oakwood. And what was so beautiful about this brother was that I never had anyone from a religious organization call me and say, I'm coming to pick you up. And he came and picked me up, and he had a lot more of the children with him, his kids and some other brothers, children from the mosque. And that day he picked me up, and we drove to the mosque. We ate donuts and drank tea and coffee and stuff. So we talked about different things. And then we began the class. And so as I was learning the Holy Quran at the time, I noticed that I began to like it. And he noticed it too. And because my love or deep passion for it was growing every day, because when he gave me a Yasin al-Quran, I didn't even know how to pronounce the vowels correctly at the time, and I didn't know how to even read it, but I would try, and I kept trying, and I kept trying, and I would stumble, and I would stumble, and I kept trying. And he would help me, and then Brother Rashid would call me on the phone, and he would give me lessons over the phone as well. And so as that time went by and I began to learn more of the Holy Quran, I began to learn the basics, then I became familiar with the sound in this pronouncing the sounds and so on and so forth. So at this time, I'm feeling this love from Ahmadi brothers. And I'm reading and I'm buying more books and studying literature of the promised Messiah, alayhi salam. And I thought at the time that, hey, I'm gonna tell my parents now. I'm becoming a Muslim. I didn't even know what bayat was at the time. I thought at the time I was just a Ahmadi because I was coming to them. And one brother approached me and said, "Brother, you ought to sign bayat." And I didn't know what bayat was. And the brother explained to me. But it wasn't until 1980 that I really signed bayat. But I was coming to Ahmadiyya in 79. Now, back in 79 again, I went back to my cousin. And I told him I'm no longer interested in staying a Moorish Muslim. I said, I go to Ahmadiyya now. And at this time, he became really, 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 really furious with me about changing. And we didn't get into any physical fight or anything, but his whole way of speaking to me, I can't say what he said, but I didn't like it. And I said some things back to him too. But the fact was that I didn't find any more interest in following Noble Drew Ali. And so I stopped. And somehow he ended up getting a copy. I don't know how he got the book, but somehow he ended up getting a copy of the Philosophy of the Teachings of Islam. And how I found out, because I ran into one of the so-called brothers, Moorish Muslims, on the streets, and we were talking, and then he started discussing the 3 stages of man in a way that he didn't say it like the promised Messiah, but he said, we were having a discussion. He said, I'm coming from my lower self to my mid self to my higher self. I'm reaching my higher self. And I was like, what is he talking about? And some of them sometimes would always say, yeah, Mo, or Islam, Mo, I'm trying to get off my lower self to reach my higher self. And I knew right then and there that they had been reading something of the promised Messiah, because they said more than that to me, but it's so long ago I can't remember a lot. I can't hardly remember some of those things, but I remember them saying that in particularly. But the fact was that I no longer had interest for more science. Now, I didn't hate the brothers. They were very good brothers. I met a few of them, but I didn't see anything in there. So by this time, me and him didn't have a connection with religion anymore. And we still were cousins, and we still treat each other with respect. But if we come together on discussion, we get into an argument. But I come to find out that later on, when my cousin died, because he died some years ago, I went to his funeral. And the Moorish Muslims were doing a janazah prayer of his. And by this time, I had been in Ahmadiyya for a while, and I was sitting in the funeral home, and my uncle, who was a religious Christian, he noticed something. And he said to me, he said, by this time, I had been to a funeral in Ahmadiyya beforehand, and I had already recognized what a janazah was. And my uncle asked me, he said, "Is that the way you all do the janazah, your funeral prayer?" He said, "The funeral prayer." I said, "No, that's not the way we do it. I don't know what they're doing." What they had did, they turned the body one way, then turned it another way, then turned it again. And I was like, what are they doing? And so my uncle asked me, because he was a religious person, and he might have seen Muslims, he might have been to a Muslim funeral. He asked me, did I do that? And I said, no, we don't. And so there was another brother there at the funeral who came to me. He said, "You must be Steve's cousin, Abdul Hakim, right? Or Hakim as they call you." I said, "Yes." And what he told me brought tears to my eyes. He said, "Your cousin had so much respect for you because he saw in you a change. And he talked so much about how you changed among us." He said, "If you want to see a real Muslim, my little cousin is one." And so I said, "Oh, he said that?" He said, "Yeah." And so anyway, after the funeral, I decided that I would go back home and read some more and discuss religion with my people. My mother, however, at the time I stayed with my mother, God rest her soul, she was very, very hard on me because I had changed. And most of the times, my mother, when I read the life of the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu, just let me say this, is that I remember when the Quraysh people kicked him out of Mecca, and how the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu loved his home. I had at a point that my mother, she would literally get upset with me, and she would say, "Leave my home." And I would say to her, "What did I do?" She would say, "Leave my home. You cannot bring that in my house." I said, "Bring what? I don't drink anymore." She said, "I'm not talking about that." She said, "That false religion that you are practicing." I said, "I'm not bothering you. I'm in the basement." So I try not to argue with her. I would like go in the basement just not to argue. And she would get so angry. She would put me out in the cold. She put me out one time out in the cold. It was so cold. I went to the masjid and knocked on the door. And I never will forget, there was a brother who was there. His name was Rakib. And I said, "Brother, is Brother Munir here?" At the time, I had got to know Brother Munir, who was the president at the Jamaat. Brother Munir, God rest his soul, he came to the door and he said, "Brother, come on in." I came in, I was cold, I was shaking. I had a few books with me, I didn't have a lot. And I sat down, I said, "My mother put me out." He said, "What did you do?" I said, "I did nothing." He said, "You sure?" I said, "My mother," I had gotten a poster from a brother with the Promised Messiah's picture on it. And that poster they had, Promised Messiah, sitting in the middle of the poster, and they got all the words going from left to right, and he's sitting in the middle. I had taken that poster, and I wasn't trying to be disrespectful, but I took the poster and put it up in we had what was called this big old, these big end tables, not end tables, but like dressers. And it had 2 doors on it. And so I put the poster in there. But I was going to bring the poster down to my room. I forgot it and left it up there. And I'm glad she didn't tear it up, but she said, you got to go. You have to leave. Take that with you. And I told him, he said, well, brother, you just offended her. And he said, she don't understand, but you just offended her. He said, so try not to offend her. And I kept trying to figure out, why was it so offensive? And so the brothers let me stay in the mosque for a few days until everything cooled down. It cooled down, and I went back home. And then my mother had some people would come over, her church people, they would come over. And she told them that I was practicing some foreign religion, as she called it. And she used to call me a Muslim. They would all say different names to me, a Mohammedan or whatever. And as I walked in the door one night, I was coming from the mosque from saying prayers with the brothers. And I was really excited because I was learning new prayers and learning how to read the Holy Quran. And she said, there he is. When I walked in the door, she told one of her pastors, she must have had like 7 people there. And they started, saying to me, young man, you need to accept Jesus. You need to. And I just walked clean past them. I didn't want to hear it. So I went down in the basement and I started reading some more. And I kept saying to myself, I got to get out of this house. I got to do something. And my mother would find little ways to pick fights. I love my mother, but during my days of early Islam and Ahmadiyya, my mother would pick all type of fights with me. She put me out again. I must have got put out 20 times. So during the winter time, she was really slick about picking winter because she knew I had nowhere to go and it was very cold and harsh outside. She put me out in the summer. It was okay. I would go down to my cousin's house or somebody else's house or stuff like that. But even when I was transitioning from a Christian to a Muslim, my family stopped taking me in. So they wouldn't let me come to their homes. And it was only Ahmadi Muslims who took me in. And so it was Brother Munir particularly who loved me a lot, and I loved him very much. And he was a brother who listened to me very carefully. And finally, he told me one day, he said, you're going to have to leave there because you're going to keep getting put out. And so he decided to let me rent a little place in the store. They had moved the store up, pyramid store up by the masjid. And I stayed in the basement of that place for a while. And I had gotten a job. I was working and so on and so forth. But it wasn't a lot of money. But I was studying and reading. And I began to see a lot about Ahmadiyya that I didn't see in the world of Muslims. And I thought at the time that all of us were like Ahmadis. This was mistake number 1. I met a young man who was an Arab. And he saw me one day. We was at a store and he looked at my hat and he said, Assalamu Alaikum. And I said, Wa alaikum assalam. And he said, so how are you doing, brother? And I said, I'm fine. Then he noticed I had a book in my hand. He said, what book is that? And that was the philosophy of the teachings of Islam. I always carried it with me. He said, oh, you Qadiani? I said, what? You a Qadiani? I said, what is the Qadiani? He said, Mr. Ghulam Ahmed. I said, yeah, Mr. Ghulam Ahmed. He said, so you're Qadiani? I said, no, I'm not a Qadiani. I said, I'm Ahmadi. He said, no, you're Qadiani. I said, okay, whatever. I don't know what that is. And then I started talking to him about the promised Messiah, salam, about the second coming of the Imam Mahdi. And I saw his face change. And then I noticed he said to me, Kufr, you Kufr. And now I wasn't that familiar with the terminologies. And I said, what? He said, you a Kufr. I said, what is that? Then he said, you outside the pale of Islam. Now, this was in the early, 79 to 80, about 80 some, 82, 83, something like that. And I was like, what do we mean? So I went to the mosque and I asked some brothers about the word kufr. And the brother said, well, brother, he just called you a disbeliever. And I said, a disbeliever? I said, why would he call me a disbeliever? I said, we all believe in Muhammad. You know, we all believe in Allah. Muhammad is the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Allah is Allah. I said, why would he call me that? What is wrong with these people? He said, well, brother, let me sit you down and tell you something. And Brother Munir and two more other brothers, there's a brother by the name of Pir Ahmed, I believe, too. We were talking about it. And they was explaining to me about Khatam al-Nabiyyin. And I didn't understand that this was an issue between Ahmadis and non-Ahmadi Muslims. They was of the understanding that Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam was last. And so the brother pointed the verse out to me in the Quran. Said Muhammad is not the father of any of you men, but he is a messenger of Allah, and he's the seal of prophets. Now that came to me in a way quite different. It didn't come to me that Muhammad was last. Even though the brothers were explaining it to me, I understood seal to mean something of value. I understood seal meant something of high value. I understood seal to be approved. You know, if you ain't burying that seal, it meant that's nothing. Because when I thought about seal, I thought about the American stamp. I didn't think about anything mean last. And so I began to study Khatam al-Nabiyyin, Nabuwat, the prophethood of the Prophet Muhammad. In the promised Messiah, salam, he explained it on how the Muslims have gone astray because they continue to believe that Isa alayhi salam is in heaven and Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is dead. And therefore there is la nabiyya ba'di, no prophet after him. That's the way they used to argue with me. And so I started asking brothers, how can I get hold of these traditions of hadith and books of reading about Khatam al-Nabiyyin. I made it my effort, my duty, to never be called kufr again without the basis of a strong argument. And so I began to study the Nabuwat of the Prophet Muhammad and the Nabuwat of other prophets. Now, my understanding that there are three types of prophethood in Islam, actually from the Quran. Actually, there is a law-bearing and non-law-bearing, then there's an independent prophethood. But let me first make that clear for some people who don't understand what an independent prophet is. An independent prophet owes no allegiance to the prophet that was before him, such as Musa alayhi salam. Jesus owed no allegiance to Moses, nor did he follow any sunnah of Moses. Moses didn't have a sunnah to follow. It wasn't declared a sunnah. And so that's why that's an independent prophet. There's the law-bearing prophet. And then also is a fourth, actually, a Buruj, which is the promised Messiah, alayhi salam, who was a reflection of Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So I made it my duty to study that and understand why they use that and why, and so on and so forth. And so I started engaging with them more. And it's a real strange story I like to tell you. I was in Arizona when I left St. Louis one time. I moved to Arizona in the early 80s, about 80, 83 or something like that, 82. I went to Arizona. And at that time, I felt comfortable enough because I had been studying with brothers. I stayed around people who could explain to me and express to me the arguments best. But not only that, my understanding of reading, Allah gave me a great understanding in how to use the certain ways of discussion. Now, I was a little rough around the edges because I was somewhat emotional like some people. And that's culture for us as African Americans. We speak with passion and we also speak emotional sometimes. But I was trying to get a hold on that and speak without getting excited. And I learned over time, and I was watching all type of brothers and Ahmadiyya. Sometimes I would go to Ishtimas and so on and so forth. I would listen to brothers' speeches, and I would watch their character. I would watch their whole demeanor and how they would handle themselves in discussions. I became curious about how to do that. And I started trying to mimic those things because I saw it to be of benefit. Sometimes I was successful, sometimes I wasn't. I would get very passionate about things. But the mere fact is that I was in Arizona. And I went to the U of A of Arizona to sit down and have some lunch because I was passing out literature. I was tablighin at this time. And I ran into this shop, which was called the Falafel House. And so I'm sitting down, eating some falafel. That was my first time tasting the Arab falafel. And at this time, the strange thing about me at the time was that what I liked about the promised Messiah, salam, I used to like the turban he had on his head. So I started buying cloth, and I would wrap my head in a turban. Now, I wasn't trying to say I was a Messiah or anything, but it was a way of attracting people to me to talk. This is how I wore the turban, the shawwal, and the hamis. And so I would walk around the AFU. I did it here in St. Louis too. And this Arab walked up to me. He says, "Assalamu Alaikum, brother." He said, "Where are you from?" I say, "Wa alaikum assalam." He said, "Are you from Jordan?" No. He said, "Are you from the Sudan?" I said, "No." I said, "I'm from here." He said, "Oh, you look like a Sudanese Muslim." And he said, "What you have there?" So I had my literature and I had my suitcase on the side and I had my stuff because I was reading some stuff. And at that time, I knew the brothers in Arizona from Ahmadiyya who was in the masjid down in Arizona. We had a mosque off of Miracle Road down there at the time. And the president was President Qureshi at the time, Qureshi. And so he used to say, "Here, brother, take this literature with you and go pass out some literature." He said, "Brother Munir have told me you love passing out literature." He had talked to the president here in St. Louis. And I said, "Sure." So I went to the U of A. And the Arab said, "What are you reading?" And then he flipped the book over to look at it. Then it said Imam Mahdi, the coming of the Imam Mahdi. Then he looked down again and he saw something said publication by Ahmadiyya. He said, "Oh, you Qadiani. You Qadiani." At that point, I said, "Yes, I am a Qadiani." And I said, "If Qadiani is a bad word," I said, "I love it." He said, "What do you mean? You know this man is a kufr." I said, whoa. Do not call me a kufr. Now, at this time, I had learned an hadith by the Prophet Muhammad Islam that said that be careful by calling your brother a kufr. For the one who says it, it will revert back to him. I said, "Brother, whoa, be careful. Did not the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam say that if you call a person a kufr, the one who calls him that, it will revert back to him?" He said, mashallah. He slowed down. So he said, "Well, brother, tell me." So we had this discussion. So here come 3 more of them. And we're sitting at this table. And I was debating with them all the arguments that I had learned. They was very impressed. They invited me to their home. And I got another brother who was with me. His name was Brother Ibrahim at the time. And Brother Muhammad Qadir was down there. And I told him about it. And Brother Muhammad Qadir told me, he said, "Well, be careful, brother. You know, we don't want you to end up getting hurt. These brothers are very dangerous against Ahmadis." So I wasn't afraid. I didn't have any fear in me about that happening because I had not heard very much about it. So I went to their home. We sat down in their home. They treated me with so much love and respect. We sat on the floor on the rug and they was giving tea and cookies and stuff, and we were having a nice time. And so we started discussing the discussion about Imam Mahdi. And I presented all the Quranic verses, Surah Al-Jumu'ah, Khatam al-Nabiyin, in Surah Al-Azab, and I discussed with them that this is how we see it. And I discussed the essence of seal. And I stood my ground on the essence of seal because I said, why are you limiting God's knowledge? You're saying God doesn't have the power to bring another messenger. Why would you say that? And then I said, surely the Quran says Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was just like all messengers. They passed away, and so will he. And I said, so you're saying to me that since Muhammad passed, Allah is not going to bring any more messengers? Muhammad was last. And I said to him, I said, tell me something. How is last any respect? If you are running a race and I come in first and you come in last, what does that say to you? How would you feel about being last? I said, Khatam has a value. The word Khatam al-Nabiyyin has value. And I explained to him, I said that there are other scholars who can testify to the same fact, that Muhammad was not last. I told him Ibn Arabi, Mullah al-Qari, and there were other scholars besides them. But just to name those two, they were some of the great Sunni scholars. I remember one time I was having a discussion with a brother, and I asked him, was he a Sunni? He said, yes, he was. And I said, do you know who Mullah al-Qari is? And he said, yes. Yes, he was a great muhaddith, great scholar of Sunni scholar. And I read to him a passage I had at the time written down, some I had gotten from someone, about what Mullah al-Qari said about Khatam al-Nabuwat, and how if another messenger came after Muhammad, he would not abrogate that particular verse of the Quran. He said, yes, I believe Mullah al-Qari. I say, so you wouldn't have any objection to this statement I'm about to make to you? He said, what is it? And I told him that you're a Sunni scholar. Before the time of Mirza Ghulam Ahmad alayhi salam, this was a famous Sunni scholar who said that if there was another prophet to come, surely that prophet would not abrogate that of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he looked at me and he said, where did you get that at? And then I said to him, how can Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam be last when Hazrat Isa alayhi salam will return? I said, it's in hadith, brother, that the Prophet Muhammad talked about the coming of Hazrat Isa alayhi salam. He talked about that Isa will come in the latter days. It's in Muslim and in Bukhari and in Tirmizi, these books of hadith. Then I quoted to him the one particular hadith. And these were the same discussions that I was having with my Arab brothers at their home. They were so impressed. They called a sheikh out of Egypt while I was there. And the one brother went to the back room with the telephone, and he was speaking in Arabic. And his sheikh said to him, he's a kafir, he's a kufr. Throw him out of your house. Don't hold a discussion with him. Now, one brother liked me so much, he came back and told me exactly what he said, because I was still there sitting and eating. And he said to me, he said, brother, he said, I'm going to tell you something. This was another Arab brother. See, it was about 5 or 6 of us sitting there. He said, they want to throw you out of their house. He's talking to one of his muftis out of Egypt. And I said, okay, that's fine. I'll leave. They want me to leave. He said, but no, I don't want you to leave. I want you to explain. He said, because what you have been explaining to me, he said, brother, I'm looking for Imam Mahdi. And he said, if you say this is what you say is true, in these verses of the Quran, in the hadith, because I had little books, and at that time I didn't have a collection of hadith. I had extracts from Ahmadiyya books. And I used them as, you know, I had them situated a way that how I was holding my discussion, what I was going to pick out to use next. And so he was so impressed, he started crying. He said, "What mosque do you go to?" I said, "Why are you crying?" You know, I said that. I said, "So why are you crying?" He said, "No, brother." He said, "You don't understand how true this is. This sounds so true." He said, "Listen, those are my brothers. We are family." He said, "But I keep hearing about this Imam Mahdi." I said, "Well, brother, if you want to know the truth," I said, "the truth is that you can come to our masjid." He said, "I will think about that," but he said, "You know, you can stay. Please don't leave." So I stayed, and I continued to explain it. And by this time, the other brother came out, and he said, "My sheikh said, brother, uh, my sheikh, my sheikh, my sheikh said that, brother, you're a kufr." I said, "Brother, let me ask you a question. How can a man call you to God, be a disbeliever of God?" I said, "If you can point out to me anywhere," and I had 2 books of the Promised Messiah. I had 3 questions answered by a Christian, and there was another one, Jesus in India, something like that. And I said to him, I said, "If you read these books, brother, you tell me, where can you find where Mirza Ghulam Ahmad alayhi salam was causing a problem, where a man such as the promised Messiah alayhi salam, show me anything that he did wrong. Show me any moral act that he committed. Show me any lie that he told." I said, "You won't find it. You won't find it nowhere." I say, "I'm glad we're having the discussion," but I said, the promised Messiah, as we call him, the Imam Mahdi, is not a liar. And so with that, I was trying to explain to these brothers who felt so passionate about the so-called ulamas, you know, the alims and the scholars. I said, "Brother, the promised Messiah is not a liar." So with that, I continued my studies with Ahmadiyya, and I continued to have discussions, and I would go to colleges sometimes too and debate. I'll tell you something else was really funny one time when I was tableeghing on the streets, and there was another brother with me. We were going into a little town here in St. Louis called Wellston. And I had the turban on. I was walking down. We were walking down the street, and I was passing out literature. And all of a sudden, there was a group of young African-American brothers. They were across the street, and they yelled across the street. Matter of fact, a car had passed right by me and yelled, "Who are you?" like that. Because I had this turban on and had the tail hanging from the turban and the long white shawls. And the brother who was with me, sad to say, but he took off running because he thought we were getting ready to get jumped on, get beat up. I stood because there were like maybe 5 or 8 brothers approaching me at one time. They said, "Man, where you from?" And he said, "Why'd that guy take off running?" I said, "I don't know why he took off running." But I had literature, and I started giving to these brothers. And we talked for a few minutes, and then they left, and I walked on back, all the way back to the masjid. And so I had in me an earlier Islam and Ahmadiyya that And I still do to this day. I'm not going to stand down from people who think that they're going to offend me or offend my religion or say bad things about the Prophet Muhammad Islam. I would politely say to them, no, you don't know the truth. You don't have the truth. You need to read more about Islam. You need to learn about the life of the Prophet Islam. And also I read the Sirah. I have the book, the Sirah of the Prophet Muhammad Islam. Pretty much that is my journey to Ahmadiyya and how it began, because I never met an Ahmadi on the street. No one never gave me any literature. I walked in, and it was amazing. It's been an amazing journey ever since. And so I have learned a lot. I continue to learn. I was reading a lot of different hadiths on the ilm, the knowledge, and how the Prophet Muhammad Islam says that lost treasure is a Muslim. In the Holy Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the most powerful thing that I learned from the Quran, this particular verse in the Quran, when I was studying the Quran early on, verse chapter 54, the Holy Quran, ayat 18. لقد يسرنا القرآن للذكر فهل من مدكر. Thus we have made the Quran easy to understand and to remember. فهل من مدكر. But will any of you reflect upon its meaning? Now this was for me something, because I always pondered over the universe. And I pondered over the Quran so much. And I kept thinking, and I kept saying, this is the truth. I never had doubt. I never looked back. I continued to go forward. Without prayers, you have nothing. The salat in Islam is so beautiful. It lifts you up in such a way. I remember one time reading about the life of the Prophet Muhammad Islam, when he said that at one point the Arabs, when they used to praise their gods and stuff, the Prophet Muhammad Islam says, you should praise Allah. When the Arabs shouted out at one time, praise be to Ubu. And he said, you should have said Allahu Akbar. And the fact is that what I noticed too about Islam is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he literally says in the Holy Quran, Lillahi ma fi samawati wa ma fi al-ard wa in tubdu ma fi anfusikum aw tukhfuhu yuhasibkum bihi Allah la yaghfiru man yasha'u wa yu'azzibu man yasha'u wallahu ala kulli shay'in qadir. To Allah belongs the heavens and the earth. Whatever you disclose, Allah knows. Whatever you hide, Allah sees it. To me, that let me know a deeper understanding about the divine is that he sees, he hears, he knows everything about us. And so I understand that also the beauty of Islam is that when I first read in chapter Surah Al-Tin 85, where Allah was talking about, he says, لَقَدْ خَلَقْنَا الْإِنسَانَ فِي أَحْسَنِ تَقْوِيمٍ ثُمَّ رَدَدْنَاهُ أَسْفَلَ سَافِلِينَ. إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ فَلَهُمْ أَجْرٌ غَيْرُ مَمْنُونٍ. He says, surely we created you in the best proportion, the best. ثُمَّ رَدَدْنَهُ أَسْفَلَ السَّافِلِينَ. But when you commit a wrong, we bring you back down to the lowest of the low. And I realize from reading that verse that it means that you can easily fall from Allah if you're not steadfast. It meant a lot to me to remember you don't want to be back in the natural state you were in when you first entered the masjid. For me, it was that I was trying to gain the essence of taqwa, in which the promised Messiah ﷺ so heavily spoke about, and the fear of God, and so much that he spoke about. And that when I read the life of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, I read that how the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was always advising his companions to always turn to Allah in the deepest, most troubling times, even when they were happy. But I learned a lot, and it was actually the promised Messiah ﷺ who led me to that diamond in the rough, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And from him, I acknowledged that he must be Imam Mahdi, because he is the one who's getting the light from the sun and getting it to us. So it was a reflection when I began to actually realize that how beautiful this man was. I love the promised Messiah salam. When reading his books, I begin to cry sometimes, and I begin to think, oh Allah, protect me from the qubr, the grave, when I leave here. I don't want to leave here and be punished in the qubr, the grave. So many of us are just taking for granted that because we're Ahmadis, we feel, oh, I'm Ahmadi, I'm Ahmadi. No, it has to be earned. It has to be earned. You have to jihad with yourself. I remember Hazrat Khalifatul Masih Khamis said in a khutbah a while back, may Allah strengthen his hand, he literally said that man needs to take a self-analysis of himself daily. Now we have a beloved Khalifa whom the non-Ahmadis don't have. I have never looked back. I have never thought about even going there with them. I have looked and watched all the hateful videos and said, this is the Ummah of Muhammad, huh? Nah, this is not the Ummah of Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I remember one time I said, I was discussing with an Arab brother, and he said to me, well, brother, you know, Muhammad is last. Muhammad is last. He kept saying it. And I said, brother, I'll say to you this. You know about the 73 sects of Islam. And I explained to him the 73 sects. And I said, you know, there is another hadith that I read. And I told him. I said, there is another hadith by Abu Hurairah. He stated that the Prophet Muhammad Islam said in the book of Ibn Majah, he stated that there will continue to be a group among my ummah who will adhere to steadfastly to the command of Allah, and those who oppose them will not be able to harm them. That hadith, to me, refers to Ahmadiyya. To me, it literally means because we are that 73, that 72 sect, and they've been trying to harm us ever since then. They've been trying to stop us ever since then. They have been unsuccessful, and they will continue to be unsuccessful. And by the grace of Allah, Allah is protecting us. By the grace of Allah, The promise of Messiah, alayhi salam, his fulfillment is being fulfilled every day. And they just can't see it. But
Jazakallah, dear brother. Really, really inspiring story. I learned a lot from your amazing journey. And in the end, we pray that Allah continues to guide the pious souls to the true Islam Ahmadiyyat. We only had this much time for today, but I hope in the future we can invite you once again and hear more about your stories of how you did the Tabligh in the early days, and if you can give us tips as well as to how we should spread the message of Islam Ahmadiyyat in an effective way. So in the end, once again, dear brother, Jazakallah for your time. May Allah bless you. Assalamu Alaikum.
wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
If you have not yet subscribed, make sure to subscribe and click on the bell icon so you can get notifications for every new video. Also make sure to like and comment on the video and follow on Twitter and Instagram.
نبينا صل على محمد صل على سفينا صل على محمد